When I left the FLDS at 18, I knew I was leaving my family behind, but I didn't realize the full weight of that decision. I thought I understood what it meant to walk away, but looking back now, I realize how little I knew. At 18, I believed I was mature enough to make that choice, but was I really? Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I was raised in a family with 4 moms and 35 kids. We were members of the FLDS Church, which is a polygamous group run by their prophet Warren Jeffs, who is now serving a life sentence in prison.
I was raised mainstream LDS. Sam and I have been married for 10 years and have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. We want to quickly thank our donors, YouTube members, and our patrons on Patreon, and all of our wonderful subscribers. As many of you know, we have a goal of reaching 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year, so if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yes, today I am really excited for this. I am going to interview Sam about what it was like for him to grow up in polygamy as a young child. A lot of you have seen many of our past videos from years ago. If you haven't, please don't go look them up. They are horrible quality.
We're redoing this for a reason. Let's just say that.
Yes, and we had a lot of videos that had little pieces, what it was like to have 4 moms, what it was like for this, what it was like for that. And recently I was like, we really just need a full interview of Sam. And so that's what we're going to do. We are going to break them up into a series so that we can get a little bit deeper than what we have in previous videos.
Yes.
So this video is going to be all about what it was like for him to grow up in polygamy and grow up in the FLDS as a young child.
Yes, a lot of you have had so many questions, and thank you all so much for asking these questions. It does mean a lot to me that you're interested in my life and kind of the experiences that I had growing up. But a lot of our videos in the past were done very quickly and short. We're ready to sit down and answer a lot of those questions, dive a little deeper, and like Melissa said, start this series where we'll start off with what it was like growing up in polygamy, but then going all the way up to some of your story.
Yeah, and where we are today.
Where we are today. So very, very excited for this. Thank you all so much for the requests, and we're looking forward to finally doing it.
Yes. So the first question that I ask everybody that we interview that I'm now going to ask you, the first thing is, where did you grow up? How many mothers did you have?
Yes. So I grew up on the border of southern Utah and northern Arizona in a place called Short Creek. If you combine the 2 towns together, it is Hilldale and Colorado City. Hilldale is on the Utah side and Colorado City on the Arizona. I grew up in Utah, so I was always a Utahn, even though I was 5 minutes away from the Arizona border. And Short Creek was a very small town, always has been, so I had a very small town life, I guess you could say, and we were fairly secluded and separate from the rest of the world. The nearest city was St. George, Utah, which was about 45 minutes away from where I grew up, where we would go for shopping and things like that. When I was born into the family, there were 3 moms, my mom being the second, and then my father had 2 other wives. And I was the middle child in the family and of my mom's kids. I was just right in the middle of everything. And when I was born, we were actually living in a double-wide trailer, like a mobile home trailer. We were kind of cramped. There were a lot of us living there. And we had the double-wide trailer, and then we also had a single-wide trailer right next to it, but that one only had 2 rooms. So it was a very big, close-knit family right from the beginning.
And how many, okay, so you had 3 mothers at that time when you were born. How many children does your mother have?
My mother has 12, and I was number 6, if I'm not mistaken.
So right smack dab in the middle.
I was number 6 or 7. I'd have to count names again. It's always a fun game of counting and memorizing everybody and when they came in the order and all of that. But yes, I was about in the middle, 6 or 7.
Okay, and then with a total of ending up with 35 kids, how many kids at a time would live in the house?
Yes, great question. So in the house when I was born, there must have been about, in these 2 trailers, there must have been about mid to high teens.
Okay.
Living there at once, because of course I have a brother and sister that are old enough to be my parents. I mean, they're quite a bit older than me. They had long moved out of the house before I was ever born. And in fact, my oldest brother had left the church and he wasn't even around by the time I was born. So it was a very unique family dynamic for sure, having such a large range of ages within the family.
And with that many kids, can you explain the dynamic of like, were there other kids that were exactly your age? Were there multiple mothers? Because your mom came into the family 15 years after your father had his first wife. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then how long was it after he married your mother that he married the third mother?
In the FLDS, when someone gets married, it's very typical to have a child right away because birth control and things like that aren't allowed. So all I really have to do is go from my mother's oldest to the third mother's oldest to
find out the
kind of
marriage
find
gap?
out the marriage gap there. I don't know how you expect me to know that answer.
I need to call up one of his sisters.
It would have been between 5 and 8 years. I'm just going to put a big gap in there because
Okay.
it's hard to know exactly, but about 5 to 8 years.
And did you have siblings that were your same age from the other mothers?
Yes. So from the other mothers, I have a brother that is 4 months younger than me.
Okay.
So, and then that was pretty common to have siblings very similar to the age of a lot of my other siblings as well. And there were some of us siblings that had a birthday, though we were years apart, we had a birthday on the same exact day
wow.
as one of the other mother's children. So, yes, it was a lot of combined birthdays, a lot of birthdays, just it seems like every month there were multiple birthdays within the family.
Yeah, there would have to be, right?
Right.
Okay, with that many people in a double wide trailer, how many kids were together in one room? And was it all girls, all boys? Were they mixed based on the mother's children, like all one mother's children? Or how was that split up? And how many siblings did you have in one room?
Yes. So even in the double wide trailer, and we'll get to the move later on because we did eventually move from those trailers into a bigger home. But even it was all separated by gender and mothers. So each mother would have their room, and it was a lot of times one on this side of the trailer or this side of the house and the other one on the other side. But we all lived in the same trailer. And then the mothers would have infants with them in their room or very young toddlers. And then there were boy rooms and girl rooms. And if there was enough space and enough rooms, there would be older girl rooms and younger girl rooms and older boy rooms and younger boy rooms. So we kind of try to separate it completely by gender and then the best we could by age as well.
Were you allowed to play with your sister? So you were sleeping in separate rooms based on gender. How separated was it as children by gender?
Okay, and really quick, I also wanted to mention that Father had his own room as well. In the trailer, because there weren't a lot of rooms, his room was doubled as his office and room. So it was a very small room. We started out, and my childhood was very humble, very, very humble life. We did have a big yard with big gardens where we'd always have lots of vegetables and fruits and things growing. So it was very humble, but it was so rich at the same time because there was so much love and happiness. And I was too young to really understand the full scope of what was going on within the church side of things. And one of my youngest childhood memories that I can remember, and I will get to and answer your question, but I did want to just kind of point this out and set the stage, is I must have been 3 or 4 years old. I was very, very young. It was, like I say, one of the earliest memories I can remember, and it was springtime, and I was laying on my mother's bed. I must have gone down for a nap or something. Of course, I probably fell asleep standing up against a tree or something, and somehow I ended up on the bed. We spent a lot of time out and about and doing things in the yard and that kind of thing. And my mother had like a silk, I don't know that it was real silk, but it felt like silk bedspread on her bed. And I didn't have shoes on, I had bare feet. And I remember just waking up and the warm sun coming through the window. The window was open and a slight breeze was coming in, and I could hear the birds chirping outside and happy kids running around. And I don't know why this just stuck in my brain so vividly at that time and to this day. And I just remember rubbing my feet against the silk bedspread and just thinking that I have the absolute perfect life and I just had everything. It was pure bliss in that moment. And that's just something I look back. When I say I had a good childhood, I felt safe. I felt like my family loved me. I had everything I could dream of. Though looking back now as an adult, I realize how cramped and how maybe uncomfortable some of the other older children were. It goes to show just how much love there was within our family, and I felt like I had it all. So it was very, very special for me. Going back to your question, though, interaction between siblings, we were allowed to interact. The boys would often go off and play by themselves, by ourselves. We would go and play in the yard, or maybe had different types of outdoor chores. At a very young age, we weren't off working or anything at that point. And the sisters would occasionally be involved in some of the yard work or the gardening and things like that, where we would interact with them. And we would play games, and I remember very vividly playing tag with my older sisters and just loving it. I thought I had the coolest older sisters in the entire world because they would play tag with me, and we would go running around. But it was not as often that we would play with, like the boys play with the girls, because we were separated in the chores that we were required to do as well. So it wasn't always, we weren't always mingling, but there was nothing against us being together and going and doing some chores together, things like that. But as far as living was concerned, we were supposed to be, on purpose, very separated.
Okay, and as far as chores go, what would be some boy chores versus some girl chores?
Well, boy. You know,
Chores.
in our
boy chores.
Yeah, boy chores. In our family, there were quite a few that were combined. We did a lot of things. Here's an example. One that was combined is we made something that's called chums. I don't know if that's the correct term for them, but
The things that connect the glasses?
the things that connect the glasses and then tie in the back so that if your glasses fall off or you pull them off, they stay around your neck.
Yeah.
And they're these little rubber things on the end that stick onto the glasses. So we would make those and sell them as a way to help bring income in for the family. And we were all kind of required to do that. So that type of a chore, I did, a lot of my brothers did. In fact, we were required to do, and a lot of my sisters would work on that as well. So that was a combined chore. Another thing we did to help bring in some money for the family is we would build wooden pallets and then sell the wooden pallets where people would ship things on. And so we would make these, we would buy wood and then we would cut the wood and make the pallets. That was something that was an outside thing that only the boys did. The girls were never involved in that kind of chore. That's more of a go get your hands dirty and fill them full of slivers and kind of more dirty boy kind of work. That would be considered something that the girls were never involved in.
Okay. And what was the chore that the girls did that you never had to do?
Oh my goodness. You know, I didn't really pay attention to what they...
I have some notes from things that your sisters said they would do.
So
Did you ever have to wash your clothes?
So I was going to say, I never really did the laundry. The boys didn't do as much laundry or ironing and things like that. However, I will say, and some of my sisters may not agree with this, but I was required at times to help with the laundry, whether it was folding, and this may just have been my mother. Maybe it was just me. Maybe was I being punished?
Probably.
I don't know, but my mother made sure that I learned how to iron. She made sure that I learned how to fold clothes. She made sure that I knew how to clean a toilet. In fact, I cleaned a lot of toilets in my day.
That's why you're so good at it now. I let him do it as often as he wants now.
So it's not that I didn't it's not that I wasn't involved in the chores around the home and in the home. I was, but it did seem like the girls would do more of that. Especially, here's a good one, making food. The girls were much more involved in making the food around the home than the boys were. So it's funny because in so many ways I look back and I think, wow, the FLDS was just such an old school, traditional, never changed with the times. The girls were required to do everything in the home and the boys would go out. And that's not really the case until I was older, until I reached an age where I was then out on the job sites and doing the work away from the home. But for the time that we were there, we were supposed to be very involved with the cleaning and helping around the home as well.
So as a young child,
As a
they're
younger
more
boy, yes.
getting to learn all the things. And then those gender roles kind of tightened as you got older.
Yeah.
Is that safe to say?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. As you become as we became a man, or as a teenager, and started being required to go out and do more big boy things, that was where the big divide came. And I think that might be the time where my sisters look back and say, we had to do all of the stuff around the home, because in that time, yes, they are correct. Once they were teenagers and the boys were teenagers, that's kind of where we separated. There was a definite line there. But there was also time for play, and not as much as maybe the norm throughout the world. But I did have a plastic dump truck that I would drive around, and by drive I mean push. And in my mind, I was driving, and it made really cool sounds, and it was the most amazing dump truck in the world, and it could go very, very fast until I tripped over a rock, and then it came to a screeching halt. But either way, we found ways to have fun. We would dig tunnels in the backyard. We had a big backyard. We always had a lot of space to go out and do things in, and so I do remember some toys. There weren't as many toys as maybe the average family would have. I remember, and I don't know if this was all FLDS families. I think it was. Someone that grew up in the FLDS as well, please feel free to comment and let me know. But in our family, the girls were not allowed to have dolls. Dolls were not allowed.
Okay.
They were too much of what you would consider an idol. They looked like a human, but they weren't a human. And because of people creating idols to worship and things like that, it was too close to that line of crossing. Oh, you would be like worshiping idols kind of thing, because they look like a human, but they're not.
I'm almost surprised that they didn't take it as a way of like these young girls preparing to become mothers. Like, oh, how cute. She's wanting to take care of a baby.
Well, you got to realize that growing up in the FLDS, there was always a little baby that you could pretend to be a mother to. So they didn't need a doll. There was always an infant.
Okay.
So if a young girl wanted to learn how to change a diaper, ooh, that's a great. Thank you for bringing that up. The boys were never, ever, ever, ever involved in tending to the babies, as far as changing the diapers and things like that, and giving them baths. That was never something the boys would do. The girls were always in charge of that. Whether it was an older sister or one of the mothers, that was something that I was never involved with, except for maybe pushing a baby around in a stroller to help them fall asleep or something like that. But it was never required that we go and change a diaper or something along those lines.
Okay, interesting. What was your favorite thing to do with your brothers when you did play? Like, what was your favorite thing to play?
Oh my goodness. Well, we found ways to be entertained, for sure. Our backyard was a big mountain, and that's another. I look back and I think, man, I did a lot of fun things. I never played video games or watched movies or TV, that kind of thing, but I did get out and do a lot of fun things. Maybe dangerous, most of the time very dangerous. But we would climb the mountain, we would build rock forts, and then we would have older brothers that would come up and test the strength of our forts and destroy them, and say, well, hey, you know what? This is what happens.
That's so sad.
If God sent an earthquake, we'd have to make sure that it's strong enough.
Would they really say that?
Yes, something along those lines. I don't know if it was an earthquake or the Great Destruction.
But it would be that God would send stuff to destroy your forts?
God could send something like this. Because growing up, we were always taught about the Great Destructions and God destroying and the wicked and hellfire and damnation and all that kind of stuff was very common in our language within the church. And so that was used as hey, God could send this, and we got to make sure it's strong enough. I look back now and I'm realizing that my older brothers were just, they were just messing with us, of course. But anyway, so then we'd build a new fort until next week. And so things like that, we would build bows and arrows, which at first was just for fun, because we would play cowboys and Indians and that kind of thing. We'd run around down in the creek that was near our house, or otherwise known as the crick. And so we would run around and play different things, cops and robbers, all that, the stuff that little kids do.
Stuff, yeah.
We did that. But then once we got a little older, we got pretty smart with our building bows and arrows abilities. And so we would whittle sticks and actually make arrows, and we would glue feathers on one end of the arrow and sharpen the other end with a very sharp point. And though it was wood, it was it could do some damage if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And then we would get PVC pipe and band it down into a bow, and then pull a piece of twine or rope on the other end, so it was very strong. We got to the point where we were building these things and shooting them straight up into the air. Don't do that. Highly recommend, do not do that. But we played this game where we'd shoot them up into the air, and then we would see who could stand there the longest. Yes, these bows and arrows were taken away from us once our parents found out about them.
I was just going to say, how long did it take for the mothers to find out about this little game?
Well, here's a little sneak peek. If the mothers found out about something, it wasn't a big deal. It was when father found out about something. Then everything came to a screeching halt, because the mothers, more than anything, would just go tell father, hey, the kids are doing this, and then he was the one that would show up, and we would all be scared. So... But we would shoot them up into the air, and then we would play this game where, okay, see who dares stand there the longest before we run out of the way. And when we shot these arrows into the air, they would completely disappear. They went far. And so we would stand there and wait till we see them coming back down and then run for our lives. I don't know how me and my brothers are alive at this point.
I don't know either.
I really don't know how we survived our childhood. So, but anyway, we did a lot of things like that that were most of the time very dangerous.
Did anyone ever get nailed in the head with an arrow?
Do I have to answer that question?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yes and no. So while playing that game, no. But there was an incident where one of my brothers, during target practice, just so happened to run across the line of fire at the same time that one was fired, an arrow was shot. And thankfully, that arrow was not a very sharp one, but it did hit him. And we quickly made up a story about how he tripped and fell, and then rushed him into the emergency room, otherwise known as my mother's room, for help, because my mother was I guess you could call her the family nurse, even though I don't know that she had any training. She was very good at natural oils and things, but or dumping some hydrogen peroxide on something and gluing it shut. But anyway, so we rushed him in, and he seemed to be okay. But yeah, that was scary. When it happened, we thought, oh, we just killed one of our brothers. So
oh man,
and that was the closest call to someone really being very badly injured.
Dang. Okay. Well, along with like the no dolls and things that you could or couldn't do, what were some of the rules that were either specific to your family or things that your family followed because of the church? Like, what were some of the rules as a young child that you had to follow?
Well, there were a lot of rules, because the church itself had a lot of rules. The prophet of the church when I was born was Rulin. We called him Rulin. We called him Uncle Rulin, actually. So the leaders of the church, we called them Uncle for some reason. So it was Uncle Rulin was the prophet, and Uncle Winston was the bishop up in Canada, and where I was at, it was Uncle Fred. So the bishop in Short Creek. So there were a couple bishops, and the prophet was Uncle Rulin, is what we called him. And so, of course, Rulin Jeffs, who we called Uncle Warren, or Warren Jeffs' father. But even before Warren Jeffs, there were a lot of rules in the church. There was a lot of guidelines on what you were allowed to wear, different colors you were allowed to have or not have. There were rules on...
Which colors? Give some more examples.
So, and once again, this was kind of based on family. In my family, the color red was absolutely not allowed on anything. I mean, not your vehicle, not your clothes, nothing. Red was considered a sacred color reserved for the return of Jesus Christ when he would return in his red robe. That was supposed to not be used. But because of how much we were taught against it, in my young mind, I always thought of red as a wicked color because we were told that we couldn't associate with it. But I guess the bit of it being sacred and reserved was kind of put on the back burner because, man, I looked at it as wicked. And if I saw someone with red clothing, I looked at them as though they were a wicked person.
So even though it started off as a symbol of sacredness, because it was a don't, it became wicked.
It became wicked. And same with black. So combining red and black because black, because black,
I wear a lot of black,
was also considered a bad color. And I think the black thing was more just in my family. In my family, we weren't allowed to wear my mother would absolutely never allow me to wear a black shirt, and she hated it if I even wore black pants. Just she didn't like the color black.
What did you wear for like going to church then?
Well, see, and that's the thing is, I think the black thing became a thing later on, and it was more a family thing, and even more so my specific mother.
Okay.
That really just did not like that color for some reason. She associated it with wickedness for whatever reason, and so I think it was more of a my mother and my family thing.
Okay, so you could still wear black dress pants, right?
A lot of men did wear like black suits,
Yeah,
to church and things like that. And yes, my father would wear black slacks as well. So now that I'm thinking about it, it was my specific mother that didn't want it. It wasn't a church,
and not in
guideline.
casual clothing, more for like
Right.
formal clothing.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, so those are some of the colors, but there were so many other rules that were just by the church. I mean, it was tithing, paying money to the church was not an option. Like when they decided that they needed to call on the people for a certain amount of money, everybody had to pitch in and pay their tithes, as they would call them. And then there were oh man, I mean, the list goes on and on for the church, which I'm sure I'll think of more as time goes on. But even above that were so many rules that each individual family made. For example, in my home, we were not allowed to run. Running in the home was a big no-no. We weren't allowed to
Watch movies.
Well, that was a church-wide thing. Sorry, I should point that out. So watching movies, unless they were approved by the father of the home, which was typically something like Bambi, or we were allowed to watch The Sound of Music back in those days. Rules got more strict with Warren Jeffs. And so a lot of the things that we were allowed to do when I was a young boy got taken away later on. But yes, TV, not allowed. A lot of books, not allowed. There were only certain approved books that were allowed to be in the home. So it seemed to be a very controlled environment. While they tried to make it seem that people had their own free will and that people had the choice to live the life that they want to live, there were a lot of rules and a lot of things. For example, if you thought that maybe you were old enough to consider marriage, couldn't do that. Well, you could go talk to the prophet or the bishop and give them, I guess, share with them your thoughts, but they ultimately decided to whom you would marry and when. So they had complete control over that. Dating, not allowed. Having any kind of relationship with the opposite sex outside of your own family was absolutely not allowed because they wanted complete control over the marriages and what was happening there and the families being built. And so that was a big rule. And one of the main things that if you broke that rule, you would be most likely completely kicked out of the community and separated from your family for good in some cases.
Dang. Going back to you being a young boy, what did schooling look like for you?
Oh boy. So schooling, by the time I was of school age, it had all been switched to homeschool. We were not allowed to go to any kind of public school. Now, what seemed to happen is a lot of the families would get together, or I guess I should say family and extended family, which everybody within the FLDS church was somehow extended family. But we had my family and then a couple other close extended families that would get together at a certain place. Each year would vary. It depended on the year where we would meet. Sometimes it was in a building. Sometimes it was in one of our own homes. But we would meet for homeschool. And in that homeschool, some of our older siblings or some of our mothers or even father taught some, I think he called it devotional, but it was more religious studies. My father would teach as well. So it was very much just a family-run school. It was only people that were related to us within the family that would teach. And we did get textbooks from outside of the FLDS at first. Eventually, the textbooks came from what Warren Jeffs had created himself and maybe with some help. I don't know for sure, but I know he had a big part of it. And it was from this Alta Academy is what they called it. So before Warren Jeffs and most everyone from the FLDS church belief that were living in northern Utah, so they were living in Salt Lake area in 2001, was it? I think it was in 2001 is when they all moved down to Short Creek from
before
that
the
area.
2002 Olympics, right?
Yes, they had to move out before the 2002 Olympics happened there in Salt Lake City area. So they all moved down. They had this school up there called Alta Academy where Warren Jeffs was the principal, and he was creating all of this material, and he was teaching all of these different lessons up there. So eventually we went from outside textbooks to using all of this content, this material that was created by Warren Jeffs himself, and use that in our homeschools. So very much controlled environment for the homeschooling, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So you never went to a public school?
I never did, and most of my siblings, slightly older than me and younger than me for sure, never attended a public school. Never got any kind of high school diploma. In fact, at a fairly young age, most of us, especially the boys, were out on job sites working, maybe not always full-time, but a lot of full-time hours. I would say I would have been about 13 years old when I started doing full-time work. And so that was about the time where my education, not even formal education, but my homeschooling education kind of came to an end about that point. I do want to give some credit here to my father. He did say and often talked about the importance of an education. Mm-hmm. He would have loved if all of his children were allowed. I'm using that word on purpose, allowed, because of the church not allowing it. Mm-hmm. He would have loved it if all of his children had had a college degree of some kind. He did love the idea of education. I think he had his hands tied, being within the church. There were a lot of things that maybe he wished he could have done, but because of the church, he was just following the rules. And so it was very much controlled. He did talk a lot about wishing that or wanting us to have an education, but it wasn't like one of those things where it was super required, especially once we reached a certain age.
Gotcha. Okay, so going back to before we get into you starting to work full-time and kind of becoming a teenager, last question I have for you is like being a young child in the FLDS, at what age did you realize that your community was different than everybody else? Was it just preached to you early on? Like, okay, you're different than everyone else. Here's why. Did you see from like going to the grocery store from the first time or seeing the outside world? Like, when did you realize you might live somewhere that's different than everywhere else?
I would have been fairly young, and not so much by experiencing the outside world, but because, like you mentioned, we were taught that we were a special people, that we were God's elite, that we were the ones that would bring to pass the fullness of the gospel, as they would call it, and that we would be those special ones that would be able to return and live with God again, because we were so few in number. That's how wicked the outside world is. The reason that there is only 9,000-10,000 of us is because so much of the world is wicked, and that's why God is going to destroy the whole world, because there's too much wicked going on. I obviously look back and think that a lot of that was scaring us, scare tactics to keep us from wanting to go and explore and see the outside world and live differently. But yes, it was taught at a fairly young age that we were different, but it was meant to be a good thing. Hey, we're different, but that's great, right?
Yeah, so being taught about the outside world being so evil, were you scared as a young kid?
Always. In fact, I would have nightmares all the time, and just daydreaming nightmares, I guess you could say as well, all the time about someone rushing into our community and taking me from my parents. And like that was my ultimate biggest fear, is somehow being torn away from my parents. And we were taught about like the 1953 raid, where that did happen. My father would have been a young boy at that time, and he witnessed it. But it was very scary to think about the government or anyone else in the big bad world, as we were taught, that were wicked people, would rush in and try to tear us apart. Because in my mind, of course, they would be working for Satan, as we were taught that the government often did, and outside people would be controlled by or be working for Satan. And of course, in my mind, because of the way we were taught to be the special, peculiar people, I assumed that the entire world was against me and my little tiny community. I assumed that countries across the world sat down on their couches at night and thought, how can we destroy the FLDS? Seriously, like, it was everything to me, and I just assumed that we were so special. And so that was a big fear of mine, that somebody would rush in and try to break up the family and the community.
How old were you when the first time you saw an outsider? Like, what did you think? Do you remember how you felt when you saw somebody from the outside? I know living in St. George, growing up in St. George, we would see a lot of people from the FLDS would come into town to go to Costco or go to the grocery store. So I was exposed to people from the FLDS, meaning that they were exposed to me as well, right? Do you remember?
So from the time I was born and my entire time living up until I was 18 years old in the FLDS church, my father held the position of mayor of Hilldale. So he was the mayor of Hilldale, Utah. And because of that, he would see a lot of outsiders. There would be a lot of meetings with Utah people, Utah officials, the government employees and things, where he would have these meetings, and he was required to have these meetings. And some outsiders would come to the town hall and where father worked, and and visit with him and things like that. But he had to be very much associating with the outside world because of his position. I think he did a really good job at trying to, let's just say, I heard and saw other people within the community that would talk a lot more negatively about the outside world. I think because of my father's position, he was able to see that not all people in the outside are bad, that there are good. I mean, of course, he wouldn't teach us that the outside world is a good place to live. He would teach against it, and he would try to obey the teachings of the church as much as possible. But he also wouldn't say, oh, I met so-and-so from the outside world today, and my gosh, did I see those horns, and definitely evil, wicked people. He wouldn't say that. He would try to find the good in people, which was a huge benefit for me, and maybe even made it a little bit easier for me. And I'm not trying to say this negatively towards my father, because I'm sure if he heard this, he would probably break down in tears. But it made it possibly a little bit easier for me to step out eventually from the church, because I didn't think of it as all bad. And of course, I learned that for myself as I got older. But in that moment, I didn't think of the entire world as bad, but I did assume that most of it was.
Gotcha. Okay, so
I'm sorry. I don't remember the first time I saw an outsider. Honestly, you're gonna laugh. There was this.
I'm already laughing.
There was this man that would come out, and he was selling rainbow vacuums.
My dad sold rainbow vacuums for a little bit.
Wasn't your dad though? Because this guy was from Chile.
Oh.
And he was from Chile, and he came out, which is ironic because later in my story you'll find out why that's ironic that he's from Chile. But he came out and sold or showed our family. I remember we were in our double wide trailer, and he came out with his rainbow, and he vacuumed up a nice big spot of the carpet, and then he dumped the dirt back on the carpet to prove how much dirt he just picked up and how amazing it was that it was how well it worked. Anyway, so I just remember seeing that, and the fact that he was even in our home. I guess that goes to show that in the early days of my childhood, things weren't quite so strict as they then became with Warren Jeffs, because once he was in power, outsiders, of course, would not be welcome in the home at all. But
gotcha.
I don't remember being super afraid of this person, but I was also surrounded by my family versus one, so maybe that's why.
Yeah, dang. That's so funny. Yeah, rainbow vacuums. That was a whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so young childhood, mostly you're just in your own little world, which I feel like is so true of all children, right? Like They are just in the world that their parents create. All little children are in a little bubble. And the fact that you got to live in a happy bubble is amazing
I was
and
lucky.
wonderful. You're so, so very lucky. You start getting to an age where you're then able to work and stop going to school. At what age was that? And I know we've talked before on our channel, but give a little more insight to where that line of, okay, we're going to stop education and we're going to have you start working full time and what that looked like.
So I guess just keep in mind that all of my older brothers were working. So it wasn't that my father came to me one day and said, Sam? Well, no, he didn't like nicknames. Samuel? Yeah, that's another thing too. Nicknames were not allowed in my family. It wasn't a church thing. That was my family thing.
Yeah.
But it's not that he came to me and said, Samuel, you need to go work and bring in money for the family. You are no longer allowed to go to school. That did not happen. I want to make that clear. It was more of a lack of emphasis on needing to continue on in school. And also all of my older brothers were doing it. And so I wanted to do what they were doing. I guess probably can't blame me for wanting to do what my cool older brothers were doing. And so I would say that I started doing some full-time work, quite frequent full-time work at about the age of 13.
Okay.
And of course, I was already about 6 feet tall at that age. And I sprouted very, very quickly, all those homegrown tomatoes. And so I sprouted quickly, and I would be out on job sites. And I was told to tell people if they asked that I was at least 16, and sometimes just say 18. If you don't want any questions, just say you're 18 years old. And I kind of looked like I was, so I was able to get away with it.
And just for everyone's information, a lot of you probably don't know this because you only see from here up on us, but Sam is 6'4".
Yeah.
So he is very tall. And yeah, being 6 foot at 13 years old, and our children are giant humans because I am 5'7" and I'm the shortest person in my family. Even the women in my family are all taller than me. They always make fun of me being short at 5'7" and a half. I'm not short, by the way. Don't forget the half. It's very important to me. And our children are very tall and will probably also be 6 foot by the time they're 13. So,
yeah.
But just had to point that out. So him being able to pass off as a 16 or 18-year-old at 13 is no surprise to me that you were able to even pass that off. What kind of construction work did you guys do?
Well, I started out, I want to say the first kind of work I did was stone work, where we would put stone, whether it was real or fake, on the outside of homes. My older brothers owned a stone company, and that's the kind of work we did. We'd also do like rock paths and patios and different things like that. So anything that had to do with stone, we would even go out and quarry our stone from, like, we'd find a big rock quarry and go out there with drills and
that's impressive.
And chisels and go to town and get our rocks out of these quarries. So it was very, very intense. It was a lot of manual labor, but we were paid.
I was just going to ask that.
We were paid some. And then we also were asked to give a portion of what we were paid to the family to help with family expenses. And that is one way. A lot of people have the question, how in the world does a father, or even if the mothers are working, how in the world are they providing for such a large family? Well, when you have such a large family, a lot of the children are getting older, and so that was a way we would go out, bring in some money to help provide. I do want to point out as well that my father's first wife, she was not born into the FLDS church, and she joined later on, which is surprising, right? She was raised mainstream LDS church, or mainstream LDS.
Yeah.
Or otherwise known as the Mormon Church. And then in her late teenage years, I want to say, she ended up joining the FLDS church and then later on marrying my father. So, very interesting there. She did have an education and she did work. The whole time I was living out there, she was working. And so she was bringing in a good amount of money for the family as well. So, just want to point that out.
Do you think that it would be possible for them to provide for the family if the teenagers weren't working? Like if they waited till kids were 16 years old, would they have been able to financially survive, or did they need kids to drop out of school in order to provide for that many people?
I think some families needed it.
Okay.
Some families needed it and probably required it. We had a fairly large family and quite a few older siblings out working and bringing in money. I don't think it would have been required of me if I had said, no, I want a great education. I want to stick this out. It never came to that, so I guess I can't say for sure, but I don't think it would have ever been forced that I go out and start working to bring in some money for the family.
Okay, so how much of your money did you get to keep? If a lot of it's going to the family, and then I'm guessing, at a young age, did you have to give some of it to the church, or did you give it to the family and then the family gave it to the church?
Yeah, so if you were under the age of 18, then you would just give the money to your father, and then he would help give the tithes and the money to the church. Okay. So he would do that. And so that's kind of how that worked. But as far as how much exactly I was required to give, my goodness, this was so long ago. And I never was good. I'm very good now, but I wasn't good with money at all at that young age. In fact, we weren't taught to save money. We were taught to earn money and then give the money to the family, give the money to the church to help build up the kingdom of God, because of course he needs money. And so we didn't really ever have the saving thing. And so I would always find ways to try to spend my portion of the money as quickly as possible so that I didn't lose it to someone. And so I would buy expensive, completely unnecessary watches or leather jackets, or a very fancy, this is a whole funny story, which I don't know if we have time for. But
oh, we have time.
Okay. I spent a lot of money on this extremely fancy bed. I just wanted this fancy bed. And so I found it online. I don't remember if it was JCPenney. I don't remember exactly, but I find this fancy bed and I said, I want that bed. I mean, it was probably like, I don't know. For me, it was way, 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 way too much money. And
especially as a kid.
Yeah. And as a kid, and I'm just like, well, I want the coolest bed in the house. So let's go get it. So I order this bed and I spend all this money that I probably got a paycheck in the mail, and I just said, here, let's get this. And and then there was someone had passed away in the community. That's another thing too, is there were a lot of people passing away in the community, and because everybody in the entire community would go to a funeral within the FLDS. And so, if you're going to every single funeral, and at the peak of the FLDS, it was 15,000 people, there was just a lot of funerals, and then the community would come together and go to those. Anyway, one of these days, there was a funeral, and we were going out to get into my father's car to go to the funeral. And as we walked out, this huge semi-truck pulls up in front of our house. It is a huge truck. And they pull out in front of our house, they get out, and they just start unloading all of these boxes, box after box after box after box. And Father is like, whoa, no, what is going on?
So this was a bed set then, not just like a mattress.
Oh, no, the whole set, everything, and a mattress. And some car keys probably. No, I'm just kidding. No, but it was the whole bed set.
How old were you?
It was, yes. Oh, boy, 14, 15.
Oh, my word. Okay, so you shouldn't even been old enough to be allowed to work.
I might have been 16. I think I was 16 at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, 16.
You get a whole bed set. How many people were in your room at that time? How many people were you sharing a room with?
So I was in a room with, so this was after we had moved out of the trailer home. And let me just give a quick story there. So right across the street from the trailer home that I was born into, there was a larger home that another family had owned and lived in and even built. And they put a lot of sweat and tears into this home to get it to this big, beautiful home that they had. And they had recently had done this big add-on. Anyway, the father of that home had passed away. And so he passed away, and so the church, being in charge of everything and how everything is handled, the church said, all right, you moms in this family and kids, or you're going with this husband and this husband and this family, and just completely separated the family that was in there and put them in different homes, and then told my father that he was to move his family, us, into that home. So we moved across the street into this bigger home. Just wanted to point that out to say that at that time, there weren't as many people living in a room at a time because the house was much bigger. So I was sharing a two 2 or 3, because that room, we kind of switched based on the time. I think at that very moment, one of my older brothers had just moved out, so it was me and 2 of my other brothers sharing that room.
Okay, and you get a whole bedroom set
And
delivered.
I get a whole, not bedroom, a whole bed set.
Yeah.
But yes, the backboard, the fancy backboard, the fancy whole bed, and then the mattress and all the fancy stuff. Yes. And so all of these boxes are just coming out, and this guy, the delivery guy, poor guy, he wasn't a part of the FLDS. He's just doing his job, but he's getting yelled at because what in the world are you doing unloading all these boxes at my house? And here, little old me, I'm like, oh, no, don't worry. It's me. It's mine. And I'm like, come on down. I'll show you where the room is and put it all right here. Anyway, so, wow, that didn't go over well with my father, though. I don't know what I was thinking. Well, of course I knew what I was thinking. I was thinking the bed was going to be dropped off in the middle of the night and slid down a chimney and magically put up in my room and no one was ever going to see it. That's what I was thinking for some reason. But anyway, of course, it was put on display. I got in big trouble for not getting that approved.
Did you get to keep it, though?
I did get to keep it. I don't think my father knew what to do with me. At that age, I had become something that he didn't expect. And it's things where I remember being in trouble with something I did, and I just was told to go to his office. And I went to his office once, and I walked in, and something happened, and I just made a comment. And I pretended. I always wanted to be a comedian. I don't know why. I just thought it was funny to say funny things. And so I walked into his room and said something funny, and he just started laughing. I'm in trouble, and he's laughing. And I don't think he knew what to do with me at that time. He's like, because what? Anyway, I tried to be obedient, but then I would do these random things like this, where he's just like, what are you doing? So anyway, I got to keep it. I spent my own money on it. And so anyway, I put it up and I had the fanciest bed in the house, which I did not get to take with me when I left, by the way.
Oh, did it go into your father's room when you left?
No.
He's like, I've been eyeing that bed for years now.
Let me clarify. It was the fanciest bed in the house. It was not the biggest bed in the house.
Oh, gotcha.
So I think one of my brothers ended up staying on it after I left. And anyway, so that was just a funny story. But I shared that story because you had a specific question. I'm trying to remember what that was. Something about were we able to keep our money?
Yes, and just how much of it was going to the church and how much of it you got to keep. So I think that answers that question.
So, I was pointing out that I would spend my money as fast as I could so that I didn't lose it on something else. That's why you will see so much throughout the FLDS church, or at least it used to be this way, that there were really fancy cars and really fancy big trucks with the dark windows and the fancy wheels and the fancy exhaust tip and the fancy everything that you can possibly spend money on. I think it was the way for these men and boys to spend money on something that they felt was their own, and they didn't have to give it away. And so they would try to find ways to spend money. And anyway, so I think looking back, that's one of the reasons for that.
As a teenage boy, what were some of the rules as a teenager that you had to follow or that you didn't follow?
Well, the main one was no Gentile music, as we called it. So we were only allowed and approved to listen to FLDS created music, which was so boring at the young teenage age that I was.
It still is now as an adult.
So just monotone. Oh, prophet, we love you stuff. And we would listen, my older brothers that were righteously following the guidelines of the church would play that song or those songs and those CDs in their truck. Yes, this back in the day of CDs, I know. And so we would listen to these CDs in their trucks, and just on the way to work, on the way back to work, all these long drives, it was just Warren Jeffs himself singing, and then his wife singing, and people throughout the community, just all we were allowed to listen to. It was so boring. I mean, oh my gosh, my ears. And so we weren't allowed to listen to anything else. But when we were by ourselves, and I'm not going to name names, but me specifically, we would listen to what I guess they considered evil or Gentile music. And we would listen to music in different vehicles or things like that if we could turn the radio on. Anyway, so that was something that we weren't allowed to do, but we would do, me and some of my other brothers.
What kind of music was considered Gentile music? Like what kind of music did you listen to that got you in trouble, babe?
Well, I specifically remember being caught once by my mother as I was on my bed. I had in secret purchased a Walkman. Is that what they were called?
Yeah.
With the CDs and the headphones, Walkman.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's when they were cassettes, but the CD,
So when it was a CD,
CD
it was called
players.
something else. Anyway, the small CD players that you could
I had one of
portable,
those.
you could carry around.
Yeah.
And headphones, and I was listening to Tim McGraw. So I was listening to Tim McGraw, and my mother walked in, and I don't know what had happened that day. I was frustrated. I had the music cranked to 4 billion, and I couldn't hear anything. And she walked in, and I opened my eyes and look up, and she's just staring at me. And of course, she can hear the music coming from the outside of and I would have been an early teenager at this point. And she was just staring at me. And I take it off, and she's like, "Samuel, what are you listening to?" And so I said, "Oh, it's just Tim McGraw." And she pulls up the CD case, and it has the name of all of the songs right there. And she starts reading the titles of the songs, and she's like, "This is the most wicked, evil, like it's talking about like sexual stuff." And of course that was very, very taboo. You do not talk about anything sexual. And anyway, I was going straight to hell by listening to Tim McGraw. And so she's like, "Throw this away right now." Anyway, I got in big trouble for that. And so music was a big one. Eventually, when I was a little older, I also purchased a DVD player, one of the portable DVD players.
Yeah.
I was stepping up in this world. I had a screen, nice big screen of 4 inches. Anyway, so we would do these. Some of us older boys would do some of these things where we would sneak out and do something we weren't supposed to do. The absolute worst sin, though, that you could possibly commit would be having any kind of relationship or talking to even with a girl outside of, for us boys, a girl outside of the family, and having any kind of communication. I mean, if hold their hand and wow, goodbye forever. But we were not allowed to have any kind of relationship with the opposite sex outside of our family. And so sometimes there were boys throughout the community, maybe even me, not going to deny or confirm that. No, but that would sneak out and go see a girl.
Sam decided that he needed to be a country song. He's like, you know what would be great if I could find like a Farmer Johnson's daughter and take her behind the elk pen. It'd make a great country song. So that's what I should do.
Yeah, that never happened, or did it? Anyway, but sometimes, and yes, that happened. But sometimes I would sneak out and literally ride my bike across town just to sit and talk to a girl. It wasn't not even making out or anything like that. And huge trouble if you get caught for that. You are at risk of being kicked out of the community and away from your family if that gets back to the leaders of the church just for doing something like that. So imagine the adrenaline that one would feel as they were riding their little bike, way too small for me, by the way. I was 6'3" at the time, probably, riding this little trick bike. Oh my goodness. Anyway, as fast as I could across town to just sit and talk to a girl. Because I was desperate for, and I was probably 16 at this time, I was desperate for, friends outside of the family and that kind of thing. And of course, being slightly rebellious that I was.
And you liked adrenaline.
And I liked the adrenaline of it all, yeah. So sneaking out our window or, trying to sneak out of the house without getting caught. But man, those parents were good at finding us and catching us. It seems like they always could sense that something was about to go down before we attempted to sneak out. So anyway, we got in a lot of trouble trying to, whether it was watching a movie or whatever it was. And there were a lot of rules, and those were very strict rules.
Going from all of these rules, now I kind of want to take a step to the religious aspect, because when you were young teenager is when Reuel Jeffs died and Warren Jeffs became the prophet.
Yes, I would have been 12 years old when Reuel Jeffs died. Yes.
Yeah, and so then Warren takes over, and I mean, you already have all these rules and things like that. What was it like when Warren took over? Did you have a relationship with him? What was the spiritual aspect of being a teenager?
Yes, I did. I often talk about the good childhood I had, and as you have kind of heard today, that a lot of what was good was the closeness of family, the big family that I had, the times when we were allowed to do things like celebrate Thanksgiving, which as a young boy I was allowed to do with extended family, and have these big celebrations. Christmas was never allowed. Halloween was never allowed. But there were certain things like the 4th of July. So when we celebrated Independence Day in the United States, we did have a celebration for that when I was younger. Mm-hmm. So those were all taken away with Warren Jeffs. So these great moments and memories created by family, even at a young age, though I did feel that I had an amazing family in childhood, I was spiritually in fear, and mentally it was very challenging because of the teachings of hellfire and damnation always being taught to us. So fear was very real even throughout my young childhood. I do have to admit that. So I was lucky enough to be born into a good family, but that didn't mean that it came without the fear that the church put on us because of, all of the rules and what we were required to do, and if we didn't, that Satan would somehow get a hold of our lives or we'd be punished by God. All of these things that were taught to us, that was very real as well. Warren Jeffs steps in. When Reuben Jeffs died, it was such a shock in the community. It was just such a shock. We didn't expect it. We expected that he would be the last prophet in this dispensation, or the last prophet of this time before the great destructions where God would come and destroy the whole world and lift up the righteous. And so when he died, it was kind of earth-shattering for some of us that never expected him to die. But of course, Warren Jeffs very quickly created this narrative where in some way or another, Warren Jeffs had become his father, and that his father was only working through Warren Jeffs to continue on the work, to guide the people until the people were righteous enough. Keep that in mind. It was always the people. It was our fault if we weren't, if the second coming didn't come, or the great destructions, and we weren't lifted up off of the earth. It was always our fault if it didn't happen. So I did want to point that out, that it was very much up to the people whether or not things were going to happen or not. And if they didn't happen like Warren Jeffs claimed they would, of course, it was our fault. But he would go on to be the prophet of the church. Many people disagreed with that, and some people left the church at that time. The majority of the church continued on believing Warren Jeffs. My family was one of those. In fact, it was one of those things where we were told to go and pray about it ourselves and find our own answer to know for ourselves whether or not Warren Jeffs was a prophet. Okay, but you've been taught your entire life that he is a man of God, that his father was a man of God, and then now we're being told that his father told the community that Warren Jeffs was supposed to be the next prophet. What do you think your answer is going to be if you go and pray about it? So it was very clear for most of the community that Warren Jeffs was the next prophet. At that moment, Warren Jeffs hadn't quite started doing all of the things that he would continue to do later on, which was a lot of separating families, destroying the community, I would say. I know that those that still follow Warren Jeffs may not say the same thing. But man, if I look back on what I had as a young boy when Reuben Jeffs was the prophet, and then I look at what the community has become under the reign of Warren Jeffs, he destroyed the community. I'm sorry if that is hurtful to hear that, but unfortunately, he did everything wrong. And the abuse of the family, the abuse of the money, the abuse of the power, the abuse of little children, just is sickening, and I am horrified when I think about what he went on to do after that. But at that time, in my teenage years, I continued to believe him, and I did think that he was a man of God and a prophet of God. And I had met him multiple times. I had met him, in fact, earlier, before his father had died, one of my own sisters married his father, Reuben Jeffs. I believe she was about his 60th wife, and she was late teens, and Reuben Jeffs was, I think, about 80 years old at the time. So it was in that moment, it was a very special thing because of the way that we were raised to believe that if someone is allowed to be a part of the prophet's family, it is the highest honor you can possibly imagine, regardless of wife number or age gap or all of those things. It was a huge honor to be married to the prophet of God. So in my young mind at that point, I would have been very young when this happened. It was, I didn't know what that meant to get married. I didn't even understand fully what that would have looked like. So I just assumed it was this very special thing. I never asked my sister. She was my much older sister. I never asked her if she felt good about it. It was none of my business, I thought. Now I wish I could go back and see how she really felt. But anyway, so because of that marriage, I had been in the home of Ruth and Jeffs and Warren Jeffs and had visited with them on multiple occasions. And also because I was a very strong believing in all of the stuff that I was being taught, the moment that I walked into Ruth and Jeff's home where he and Warren Jeffs were, and this was just after my sister had gotten married, the feelings that I felt, I thought was very strongly the Spirit of God communicating to me that the church was true. I had these feelings of the feelings that I told I would always have if I was in the presence of God's servants, the feelings of peace, the feelings of love, the feelings of just warmth and security. I felt all of that. It was like I had died and gone to heaven as I walked through the door into Ruth and Jeff's home and visited with him and Warren Jeffs. And now I know, looking back, some of the things that were going on in that same home during that same time that were just horrific. And I think, how in the world could have I had those feelings if these things were happening? And of course, I understand now that our minds are very strong, are very powerful tools. And if you are convinced enough that something will be a certain way, it will be that way regardless of whether or not in reality it is. And I know that's kind of confusing, but that's kind of what I've come to realize now.
Yeah. So at that time, you're believing that the prophet is the true prophet, that Warren Jeffs is a prophet as a teenager. You are struggling with the rules, but not in a way that is going to get you kicked out. You're just kind of flirting with them a little bit there,
Right.
flirting with the Farmer Johnson's daughter.
I most certainly at that time was terrified of being caught and being kicked out. I still fully believed in all of the church stuff.
At that point, was there ever a point in your youth at all, or in those teenage years, where you felt like, okay, this isn't going to be for me, I think I'm going to leave at some point?
You know, it's funny you ask that, because there were moments where someone else in the community, maybe it was a girl, asked me if I would leave. And even at the age of 16 and 17, the idea of leaving was terrifying to me, because at this time I had worked outside of the community. I had done a lot of these construction jobs. I went on to do some framing and some carpentry and some flooring and different kinds of things. I had done a lot of different types of work outside of the community by the time I was 16 and 17, and I had had a chance to meet a lot of people. But when we say meet people outside of the community, we don't mean become friends. We weren't really supposed to associate with outsiders in the sense of actually getting to know them. We were just allowed to associate with them in work transactions. You know, yes, you can go make money by dealing with them, but don't become their friend and ask about their life and that kind of thing. So I was still terrified at that age that if I were to leave, I would fall into this Satan's ground. He has control over my life. And there was a lot of fear even at that age.
Okay, so up to that point, you still did not have any intention of leaving.
No.
Okay, so you're working. How does that change?
Oh boy. Well, this is where the story gets interesting. And really where it really started to change is there was this one specific job that me and some of my brothers started doing. It was a remodel job, and I honestly didn't work on this job that much. I may have gone a few times. Some of my other brothers worked a lot more on this job. But I did go to this job a couple times, and it was a remodel job, like I had mentioned. So the family was living in the house while we were doing the work. And while we did this work, this family was just, they had the mom and dad, and they had multiple kids, but they were all just so friendly. And it stood out. It was unique because, like I said, even though we had met other people outside, we didn't really get to know them, and they didn't seem to be that friendly. Looking back now, it was probably because of the way we were acting towards them that they didn't want to be friendly to us, because we were kind of being, standoffish, because that's the way we were raised to be. Anyway, our manner of being didn't seem to bother this family. They accepted us for who we were, and they would come out and visit with us. And they would bring us, if we were thirsty, they would bring us something to drink, or they would come out and just visit. They have a daughter that would come out and visit with us. She was about our age, and she would come out and just sit on a bucket and talk to us while we were working. And that just was so different. It was just so unique to us that we couldn't just brush it aside and say, oh, okay, well, must be Satan's work of some kind. It was a genuine family that seemed to just be very happy and very kind. And so that stood out to all of us. I remember us boys would go home after and say, wow, we would talk about our experiences and just how cool this family was and how amazing we thought it was to be able to work on that job. But anyway, that's kind of where it all started. Once I was of the age, I would have been about 17 going on 18 at this time. Once I realized that there were good people outside of the community, the church that I was taught was the only truth and where the only happy people lived, truly happy people. Mm-hmm. Once I saw that for myself and was of an age where I could accept it for what it was, that's truly when the question started creeping in. And yes, I was 17 going on 18. And I left the month that I turned 18. So it all happened very quickly, very unexpected. But those questions of, whoa, am I being taught the truth? Is the world as I'm being taught, or is it something completely different? And of course, that's just where one question led to another question, and my whole world started to change.
Okay, so you are starting to feel these doubts. You're meeting this family, realizing the outside world might not be so scary, and realizing that there is good out there in the world. You're almost 18 years old. You can't really leave till you're 18, right?
Right. I mean, you could try to, but if your family decided to want to get you back legally, they could send, law enforcement after you to try to find you and bring you back. And that did happen multiple times within the community. So that was something that I had to consider as well, that, if I'm not 18, I cannot really just leave, even if I want to. And I didn't really, even though I had these doubts and questions, I didn't really want to leave yet either. Okay. It wasn't until, I'm going to try to shorten the story a little bit because there is a lot of little details here, but it wasn't until one day we were working on a job, and it actually wasn't the job of this family where we did the remodel job that I'm referring to. We were working on a different job, and the daughter of the family that had come out and visited with us and sat down on a bucket and talked to us, and we had created a good relationship with this family and this specific daughter. She came to say hi to us because we become friends. And so we were on a different job in St. George, so she drove over to say hi to us. After we were done with that job, we had decided, as us brothers that were together, there were 4 of us brothers together and one friend or one other person from the community that was working with us as well. We all gathered together after we were done working at a local restaurant, and we said, let's just go to dinner. And so we all went together to dinner. And after dinner, 2 of my brothers, the better 2 of my brothers, said that they were going to rush home before anyone got into trouble, because that's something else too, is that our parents and community would keep tabs on us. They would always know when we were supposed to be home. Mm-hmm. And if we weren't home at that time, they would be concerned that something bad had happened to us, or maybe possibly we were rebelling in some way or another. Of course, we didn't want that. Well, Two of my brothers didn't want that, and they rushed home. Me, one of my other brothers, one just older than me, and the friend from the FLDS community that was with us, we decided to stay. And we wanted to continue visiting with this girl and just, ask some questions, maybe get to know the outside world a little bit better. And so from the restaurant, we drove over to a local park where we parked the truck and just sat there and talked. And then we talked and talked some more, and we were just having the most amazing conversation and time visiting. Just felt like we had kind of taken control of our lives. We'd chosen to not do what we were supposed to do, but we were doing what we wanted to do, maybe for the first time. And so we sat there talking at this park, and let's just say our phones started to get text messages and phone calls and things like that. Next thing we knew, it was 2:00 in the morning. Okay. The gravity of being out that late and the trouble we could get into if someone knew that we were with an outsider, and even worse, a girl from the outside world, us three boys. Who knows at that point? We had chosen to not care in that moment. We didn't fully understand the consequences that would follow. We just wanted to take control of our lives in that moment. And it was 2:00 in the morning. We had already received multiple text messages, multiple phone calls. Where are you? What are you doing? Oh boy. So at that moment, I had just turned 18 years old, and my brother, just older than me, was also 18 years old. And we were with a friend that was our age as well, and a girl that was our age as well, an outsider. And so we were very concerned what was going to happen next. And we both looked at each other, me and my brother and our friend. We looked at each other and said, this is going to sound so crazy now. We said, what if we just didn't go back? Because we were concerned about what was going to happen anyway, what was all of the punishments and the consequences. And we said, what if we just didn't go back? And then if they find out we were with a girl, then nothing matters. And then we were like, yeah, we can do this. We got this. I had $20 in my wallet. My brother probably had about the same. Our friend, not much more. And we just figured, you know what? Now is as good a time as any. We don't have to try to escape or something like that. We can just not go back. And so our friend looked at us like, okay, you are the craziest boys I've ever seen in my life. What are you, just leave? Because she understood at this time after visiting with us that leaving the FLDS meant not going back. If you choose to leave the religion, you're never welcome to live in that house again. You're never welcome back into your family. You are leaving everything behind, everything you know, all of your loved ones. You're leaving it behind just by making the choice not to believe religiously the same that they do. And that's what we mean when we say leaving the FLDS. We mean leaving religiously, which followed up with what we were forced to do, which was leave our family.
At that moment, though, you're leaving the community. You don't want to go back. You know that you're not going to go back to your home. At that moment, though, were you leaving religiously?
Not necessarily. Good point. At that moment, I still did believe that Warren Jeffs was a prophet, but I didn't really want to go back and live in have the same rules. I didn't really want to have to live the same lifestyle now knowing what I knew then. I knew more about the world than I think I was ever supposed to know. And so even though I believed Warren Jeffs was a prophet at that time, I thought to myself, my very capable 18-year-old mind that knew everything, I thought to myself, here's the thing. I'm going to just kind of step outside, experience life a little bit differently, and see for myself, is this world this big bad place that I'm taught that it is? And if it is, if it so happens to be, I will go begging on my knees back to my family and say, please, I repent, I want to be back, take me back. That was my thought.
Yeah.
That was my thought.
Just a chance to go experience the world.
Yeah, because I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure anymore if it was what we taught it was to be. And at this time, Warren Jeffs, this was in 2008, Warren Jeffs had been in prison for 2 years now because he was put in prison in 2006, caught and put in prison. So the dynamic of the community was already starting to change a little bit with him being in prison. Don't get me wrong, the community still was and is today following Warren Jeffs as their prophet, even though he's in prison. So he's life sentence in prison for all of the abuse and things that he was put in prison for. And so, of course, at that time, I didn't believe any of this stuff that he was put in prison for. All of the things that he was accused of doing and now convicted of doing, I didn't believe that it actually had happened. I assumed that it was the devil working against God's church and putting out into the news all of these awful things that were completely fabricated and never happened. I didn't think they had happened at the time. So anyway, all that being said, we said to each other, you know what, let's just sleep on it. Sleep on it, see what happens. And of course, at this time, so many phone calls, so many concerned parents calling us. And this girl we were with looked at us and said, I mean, you guys are crazy, but I mean, if you really don't have anywhere to sleep tonight, you can sleep on my parents' couch. And we said, okay, why not? So, you know, it was kind of a whole scary thing. I mean, this is the first time we're going to be sleeping on a Gentile's family couch outside of the community. We're going to put ourselves in this position with outsiders. Of course, they may be just as scared of us as we are of them, because just such different lives, even though we live not too far away. And so we said, sure. And that is where we headed. And on our way there, I decided to finally answer one of the phone calls that came in from my mother, just so that she could know that I wasn't in, physical harm or something like that. I didn't want to do that to her, to keep her up worrying about that. But man, if I could go back now and handle the situation differently, I would give almost anything to go back and just handle it differently. I was 18 years old. I was just so quick to jump to conclusions and just make decisions, just not really thought well. The decisions weren't thought well out. And so I just answered, and I tried to make light of the situation. I mentioned earlier that I always tried to make light of a situation. And my mother called me, and I answered this time, and I said, well, I'm actually just not going to come back. And I decided that I'm going to, sleep out here in the world today, and we'll see what happens. I do have to point out as well that at this time, it wasn't quite as strict as it later became. I knew that I would never be able to go and live with my family again, but I didn't think that I would never see them again. The rules of not seeing my family ever again, well, my siblings, yes, but my parents I thought I could still see and communicate with later on down the road, and we'll get to some of that in the next video. But yes, I just said, sorry, not coming home tonight, just so you know I'm physically okay, okay, goodbye. And of course, she's just begging me, Samuel, please, everything we have taught you is true. How could you possibly leave everything behind? You are destroying the eternal family that was promised to me and promised to you. And you're taking this away from us. How could you possibly do this to your family? And yeah, it was very, 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 very hard. But ultimately, I knew that if I was going to try to convince my mother that my decision was okay, that the conversation would go on the entire night, because there was no convincing her. And to this day, if I had a chance today to talk to my mother, she would do nothing but beg me to come back. Even if it's not possible because the church wouldn't allow me, that's all she wants. She wants her family together. She wants this eternal family that was promised to her and all of her children, and to her it's everything. And I really hurt her in that moment, and I wish I could have done it differently, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to do anything differently at that age, and everything I had been through. I just was in a very weird space and position that I just wasn't sure how to handle something like that. So ultimately, I just said, well, I'm sorry, I'm just going to turn my phone off because you're not listening to me, and I can't convince you that what I want to do is the right thing. So goodbye. I'll talk to you tomorrow. And I just hung up my phone and turned it off. And then we went on to we did go and sleep on the couches of this home that we had done the remodel jobs on, and that this girl, her family lived at, and we were on our way to sleep on a couch and wake up to a new world and everything. I just had no clue what was about to happen in my life. I way underestimated what was to come next.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm over here. We should probably cut this part out. Oh, every time you talk about that, it always makes my mom heart sad for your mother. But also, just so you know, you were just a kid though. Like at 18, we all do things like that to our parents, right? We've all said things we didn't want to say to our parents at 18, or said something hurtful, or done something that we wish we hadn't. That's so common. And normally in the normal world, there isn't such extreme consequences.
Yeah.
For someone making a decision like that. You know, if you sleep on your friend's couch and you don't go home one night and you say that to your mom, you don't normally not have a home to go back to after it. You know, there's more grace like that. So my heart goes out to your mother because she, I think, understood the gravity of the situation, and it also goes out to you because you didn't.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, I always get emotional about that. But on that same note, my question for all of you viewers who have lasted to the end of this story, or this portion of Sam's story, is, have you ever made a decision at 18 years old that you thought you were mature enough for, that you later looked back and realized you were just a kid and you didn't have the capacity to understand all of the consequences of that action? I know that I have. I'm curious if you guys have as well. And oh, sorry that I was so emotional.
Okay.
But
I understand.
But yeah, please let us know in the comments section if you've had an experience like that at 18 as well. And please like and subscribe if you want to hear more about what it was like for Sam to grow up in polygamy. And also know that this is the beginning of a series. So next week, we're going to have more to come on the consequences, basically, of that decision that night to turn off his phone and to stay with that family, where that leads him, where it leads him into another church. And the series will continue on all the way to where we are now. So Stay tuned for all of that.
If you're still here, wow. Thank you. But it's a lot of information. But thank you all so much for being here with us again. And we look forward to talking with you soon.
We'll talk to y'all soon.